This week on Sailing Trilleen, an exploration of some of the accessible trails around the Caledonian Canal with my wheelchair, and also a look at what happens when it's so calm that you can polish your boat on Loch Ness while underway.
Good morning and welcome to Sailing Trilleen. This morning I'm at Dochgarroch East, which is in the reach between Muirtown Lochs in Inverness and Dochgarroch, which forms the border between Loch Dochgarroch and which interconnects with Loch Ness and the reach. So it's a kind of protective loch. It's usually not got very much of a rise or fall. So this morning my first task is to turn the boat round because she's currently rigged for portside transit, which is what happens when you go east, and I'm now going west again, so I need the boat rigged for starboard side transit. And as I do that, I'll show you some of the tricks that I've learned about solo passage with Trilleen at least, and they might be of some use to you. This morning it's a lovely morning, it's cloudy and the canal is really still. Last night the wind came up quite dramatically and it was really gusty coming down the reach, so I'm hoping that it stays quiet tonight. The wind in Loch Ness and Loch Dochgarroch is a bit unpredictable. The winds coming off the mountains have a big effect, and I'm not really convinced that the forecasting models have quite got there yet. So the secret to single-handed locking for me with Trilleen is this improvised snatch block, which I hang off my anchor roller. Ideally a proper snatch block would be better, but snatch block for my mooring lines is incredibly expensive, and the only time I really use this trick is in the Caledonian Canal when the water's fresh. And so the use of a climbing carabiner, which is aluminium and which out at sea would be not really very recommended for this role, is ideal. I also dispose of the carabiners really regularly, so it's a quick trick for getting around a problem without buying loads of hardware. One of the problems with Trilleen is that although she's got loads of storage space, she is quite a small boat, so you have to find somewhere to stash stuff, and if you only use it once a year or twice a year, it's a bit frustrating. So this will be the bow line for Trilleen. It's about 25 metres long. In fact, it is a 25-metre line, and that's about appropriate for the trick we're about to pull. So you'll need to vary that length depending on the length of your boat, but Trilleen's about 8 metres on deck, so that works for me. The line then goes around outside of everything, all the way back. So now I've got two ends of the line all the way back. One's the throwing end, which I'll put a bowline in, and the other is the hauling end, which I will put around a winch.
The end result is that the throwing ends of the lines with the bowlines get hooked onto the cleats on the dock side, and then I can sit in the cockpit with lines around two winches. Occasionally, if there's a lot of turbulence, a judicious burst of engine power can warp the bow back towards the wall and make drawing the headline in easier. I note that those boats with bow thrusters make pretty heavy use of them in the locks too. The speed of the lockups does vary depending on what's in the lock and the judgment the lock keepers make about the vessel's competence.
Good morning from Sailing Trilleen. I'm currently berthed at Dochgarroch, which is about 3 miles outside of, maybe 3 kilometres even, outside of Inverness, Muirtown anyway. And my plan is to take the wheelchair into Inverness because I got a notification last night, just after I'd slipped lines at Cali Marina, that a part that I'm waiting for has arrived. So I need to whip into Inverness and pick that up before I decide what else I'm going to do. The other thing that allows me to do is to explore the Dochgarroch Loop, which is a beautiful accessible trail which runs from Inverness Muirtown to Dochgarroch Loch, with a coffee shop at the end at Antala, and then another way back on the other side of the canal next to the River Ness. It's a very heavily used trail. I see mums with buggies and all sorts of stuff, so I'm going to check it out with a wheelchair and a tri ride and see how it goes, and I will be reporting back. As I said last week, the canal offers some of the finest opportunities in Scotland for accessible walking, by which I mean the opportunity for people using wheeled mobility devices to get out into the wild, or as close to the wild as is practical, on flat graded tracks. So I'm going to be looking at some of those, and Dochgarroch Loop is going to be the first one that I have a look at.
The first thing that happens when I want to go for anything more than a minor walk is to extract my wheelchair and its amazing tri-ride power attachment. Because Trilleen is a tiny boat, everything gets broken down into its smallest parts for storage. That's why you're watching an apparently random collection of mobility bits emerging from the hatch at the moment. The Tri-Ride is a lithium-powered wheel motor that clips onto the front of the wheelchair, lifting the front caster wheels off the ground and then pulling the chair and me along. I have to say that this is the single best bit of disability equipment I've ever acquired, and that the time it takes to build up and strip it down doesn't take much longer than this piece of film. I should also say that I'm not sponsored by Tri-Ride, although of course they are very welcome to hit me up. Once I've got the kit rigged up, it's time to grab the cameras and some kit that I need to stay safe and well out and about, and then head away down towards Inverness. I've said before that one of the things Trilleen does for me is to allow me to get out into the wild places, which I wouldn't be able to access without her. She is a capsule that allows me to float into some of the wildest places in our islands. The Caledonian Canal is a waterway driven through wilderness, and many of its towpaths and service roads are extremely good quality murram and packed gravel tracks, which make for cracking accessible walking areas. The Dochgarroch loop on the outskirts of Inverness is an example of just how good it can be, and it's a massive amenity for anyone staying in or visiting Inverness, which isn't mentioned enough. If you've got a manual wheelchair, ideally with a freewheel or power attachment, or another wheeled mobility device, this is an accessible way to see what I call some of the real canal, which generally begins about 5 minutes away from the tourist hotspots at the locks.
In places, the bluebells are still thriving along the banks of the canal, filling the air with a heady scent and lighting up the fields. The contrast between the yellow gorse and the blue, deep blue of the bluebells is really striking, and is a joy, really. It's a joy that goes deep into my heart. It's very difficult to explain how it works, but it's kind of resonates. It resonates, it's like my whole body kind of vibrates with joy when I find places like this. Even the shotguns. As we get closer to Inverness, the track is turning into increasingly good quality murram, which is much easier for wheelchairs to work on than the cinder track that bridges the distance between the tarmac at Antala and Dochgarroch and Inverness. It's really good quality here. You could push a chair along here even without a free wheel. It would be absolutely fine.
All too soon, I and the Tri-Ride were safely back at Trilleen. On reflection, it's probably closer to 7 or 8 miles from Dochgarroch to Inverness. But this joyful trip is a genuine reflection of what I get up to with the wheelchair on the boat. It allows me to do stuff I simply wouldn't be able to any other way, whether it's picking up parcels, getting gas cylinders, doing laundry, or any of the other essential jobs that keep cropping up round the boat.
So the intentions today are, I think, probably to go to Fort Augustus, although I haven't really decided very firmly yet.
By convention, I always start my engines on Trilleen before I mess with the mooring lines in however minor a way. Obviously, that would be different if I was departing under sail, but in the canal there's no sailing, so that ain't gonna work. And the reason I do that is just because it gives me a factor of safety, really, around manoeuvring the boat if something goes wrong. It's a step that I don't need to perform, and especially in restricted waters like this, it can make a big difference. The downside obviously is that you've got a live prop, so then you have to be a lot more careful with the lines, and so I respect crews that do it either way round. I think if you've got a fully crewed yacht and you've got 2 people working on shifting the mooring lines, it's probably safer and easier just to do it that way. So what I'm doing now is taking off the head ropes, coiling them up so that I don't have them hanging around on deck, and I'm swapping them over for the springs, because this is going to be what I call an in-hand departure. There's almost no wind, so I'm going to treat Trilleen like a keelboat or a big dinghy. I'm going to take both lines in my hands, I'm going to give her a good shove, get her around the boat ahead, and we're going to step on. This is the stern line, getting coiled up nicely, and I've got a cleat down by my feet, which is my reserve option, so that if something goes wrong during the launch, so to speak, I can get one or both of the lines that are going to be in my hands around that cleat. And I emphasise, this is not something I do except on flat days. but in marinas it's quite often the case that it's a good trick. And because we swapped the springs round, we've now got enough rope that we can actually hold both without a problem. So I'm just going to walk the boat back, rolling her along the one remaining fender until I can grab hold of the cleated line. And this also makes for a bit more room because I can only depart at a shallow angle because of my stern gear. So I'm calling up the stern line so it can't possibly get into the prop. The head rope is suitably length that it can't go into the prop even if it goes into the water. Gauge your head propulsion very gently. Get the boat moving away from the berth. Throttle back to neutral. Loch Ness was so ridiculously calm and I was a little bit bored that I resorted to polishing the boat as she was going up the loch under engine and autopilot. It's not something I've ever done before and I suspect it won't be something I ever do again, but literally the loch was like a mirror. In places it was just flat as pancake and in places there were just tiny ripples. So I've got a nice clean boat now, and I wasn't going to show you anything of the passage up Loch Ness because you've seen it before, but the irony of being able to polish your boat underway was not lost on me. And now for another look at a disabled friendly walk you can get around the Caledonian Canal. The ride from Kytra to Fort Augustus is really gorgeous. The canal runs on one side and the remains of the River Oich on the other, draining down Loch Oich into Loch Ness. All around the birds are singing with a peculiar intensity that comes with the need to feed young, I think. And the gorse is blooming out and the flowers are just beginning to come into bloom. It's a really gorgeous, gorgeous day. The canal is sparkling and blue and the River Oich is a deep brown, sunlit, shimmering with the rocks underneath and the weed. I'm sure there are lots of trout and other good things in the river, but the notices are very clear that there is private fishing. This is the middle district of the canal. It has a distinctly highland flavour despite being only a few hundred feet above sea level. This reach is where you start to first see the really wild part of the Caledonian Canal and to enjoy its beauty. Once clear of the bustle of Fort Augustus, there is quite literally nothing around you except for the wildlife. Water voles, herons, swans, apparently some pine martens. The track is extremely well made. It's a packed gravel road. Murram, as it would be called in other parts of the world, but this is actually better than that. The conditions on the track are really good. At the moment you could certainly bring a conventional wheelchair down it without many problems at all. Mid-wheel power chair, absolutely no problem at all. Manual wheelchair with a free wheel, yep, you could push down it, it's almost completely flat. Manual wheelchair with power attachment, yeah, no problem at all. It's a good track. There are a few places where there are little potholes and you need to keep an eye out for them because they're a little bit difficult to spot in the white gravel. The weather at the moment in the canal is really quite remarkably beautiful. It's almost too hot for me, in part because of the pig splints that I'm wearing, but it is just gorgeous and very actually uncharacteristic for this canal. You have to be prepared here for 40 knots of wind and driving rain, and that's been my usual experience, I have to say. But at the moment it is just unbelievably beautiful. There's a perfectly clear blue sky. It's about 25 degrees I would estimate, and the sun is just beating down. The canal is shining blue. It could be somewhere in France, somewhere in the Mediterranean. It really does feel like that, although the wind does have a certain chill to it, which for me is very welcome. Thanks for watching. Friendly reminder that this is a public video and you are very welcome to share it with anyone and everyone. And next week I have no idea what I'll be up to, but I suspect that I'll be back Inverness way and quite possibly back into the marina from whence I came.